This body of research was conducted on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I acknowledge that I work on stolen land and that the sovereignty was never ceded. I respectfully acknowledge ancestors past, present, and emerging, and the gifts of knowledge and culture we are all invited to share. Design of public conditions. Public conditions of design can be read both ways and understood as both a consequence and a cause. Philosopher Richard Sennett brings to our attention this urban reaction, proposing that social space is a social product. I propose the question, how does public space shape our collective conditions? As a provocation to explore the parameters, edges, and qualities of public space and commoning. Initially guided by a curiosity of privately owned public space, coined POPs in recent urban debates, probed the restrictiveness and authority of the built environment. By testing the accessibility of these contested territories, Melbourne's public space became a muse term for political rejuvenation. As I recognise that our city is often designed by a group of people at the expense of others. Influenced by Interborough's research, I investigated the artefacts or weapons designed to include or exclude the public. With limited information of Melbourne's POPs available, my practice became centred around process, not too concerned about the measurable outcomes, but intrigued by the interplay occurring between public design and neoliberalism. These invisible codes and regulations that shape our behaviour were challenged and manipulated as I tested the resistance of the city. I would intervene with sight and allow it to be free to roam, indifferent to the public's quantifiable response. Henri Lefebvre emphasised the importance of repetitive cycles of moments. Thus I employed my body and senses as an instrument to resist the subjection of common space. In an act of radical pedestrianism, I continued doing and a pattern emerged. Lefebvre's notion of the right to the city appeared eminent in almost all of my work. This steadily grew as the substrate between individual action and impotence, between politics and poetics. I dreamt in and of public space, exploring our shared landscapes and institutions as responses to the facts governing and even forbidding our lives. Following a work titled Memorial, inspired by Sarah Burrell and Tony Birch's writings, I questioned the deceptive ornamentation that monuments employ to shape our collective history, which led me to Hoddle Grid, a monument in itself, becoming a container of friction, debate, and exhibition for my research. Not the first time people have been contained by Melbourne's grid, which prompted explorations led by Guy Debord's Derive to defy the grid's design. The work became driven by a desire to explore the relationship between the city, our set, and our behaviour within its script, to understand the ephemeral experiences of the everyday that the built environment incubates. The personification of the city, prompted by practitioners Bernard Tschumi, Francis Elias, and Yoko Ono, was a method that exposed incognito systems of public space. The city's archetypes, parks, streets, towers, and blocks became the protagonists in the film that we all play in called Our Public Life. The narratives that play out in these civic spaces are the rhythmic possibilities of the city. Interventions within public space uncovers alternate ways of knowing the city, being a catalyst to connect to the physicality of place. A pivotal exploration was defining these otherwise invisible situations of contested spaces and experiences, as my interventions then reflected or deflected these terms. Simply by the virtue of paying attention and naming these situations, a discourse around their future could be envisioned, and space could become interiorized. What began as taking photos and documenting became a poetic and allegorical method to address political and social realities. Researching in this space as our modes of publicness are changing, the thresholds between public and private, intimacy and exposure was always shifting with the impacts of a pandemic. While walking my same route to uni later in the semester, I noticed that the removed fence perimeting Carlton Gardens, previously analysed in a work, Designed Hurdles, had been resurrected for the garden show, operating as a public artefact of exclusion. This became important to me as I discovered the temporality of these spaces. Then revisiting the POPs, maintenance had occurred. The images of sight had changed and their meaning altered. I started to collect and privatise loose parts of public space as I archived and photographed them at home, making them my own. Finally, in an act of maintenance, I repurposed the found mementos of place and fixed the stump of a public tree. This marked a shift in my research as I began assembling and reassembling the work I had generated in an attempt to disrupt the associations and invite connections of new meanings beyond the defined terms. Archiving became a process of association, a practice within itself. This practice will continue to operate across Huddle Grid, materialising the immaterial conditions of public space. The outcome is unclear, but the process stands as a framework to unveil the potentials of these sites. Thus far, this research deals with the immediate conditions as a way of humanising site in order to understand and inform design decisions, alluding to the part of our civic selves yearning not just to be collective, but connective.